Hey everyone, welcome to week 10 of EDI 310. This week our topic is on setting up and managing small group work. After you complete the readings and videos this week, you should be able to identify appropriate talk, movement procedures, appropriate signals for student attention, and interventions. Discuss appropriate monitoring and feedback of group work. And you should be able to rehearse setting up and managing group work. For the readings this week, please be sure to focus on interactive learning structures, pages 91 through 117, and the setting up and managing group work document. You'll also notice there are 3 videos for you to view regarding setting up and managing group work. And as we're thinking about how this connects to the core teaching practices, this week's topic connects to CTP number 9, setting up and managing small group work. Before we get into the content and reading, I do want to take a moment and engage in the crumpled paper check-in. So this is an example of a community building exercise you could do with your students, depending on the age level you're working with, and there are a couple considerations about how to do this as well. In some situations, it can be more or less impactful and even harmful if it's done incorrectly. So this might be something you consider adding to your CMP. So what happens here? In this exercise, you'd ask each person in the meeting to write down something that's been holding them back this semester. So it might be a limiting belief, external circumstance, or something else completely. Then have them crumple the paper up and try to make a basket, even if it's just a garbage can in the corner, whatever, and throw it away. So it's a great way to blast through perceived obstacles. Now, I've seen this used in certain kinds of meetings, especially things where students are getting together and they have a more safe space, or they really want to engage in a deeper level. For example, I was the advisor of the Gay Straight Alliance at my school, and they were in charge of all their activities. So the way they did this is they crumpled up the paper, they threw it around, they called it a snowball fight, and then they pick it up and read something. Now, I didn't know they were going to do this activity before they did it, or I'd probably suggest to do it in a different way because, people know other people's handwriting, or you might have seen who threw the snowball. So to make this a more safe kind of activity, if you did want these read out loud, because there is value in reading these out loud, as long as students know they're going to be read out loud when they write them, and they will be anonymous. So if you can ensure a way they would be anonymous, it is valuable for students to see that others have some of the same limiting beliefs. It's not just them thinking those kinds of things. So you might do this on an anonymous Padlet, or you might have students somehow submit them anonymously, and then you type them up so other students don't know the handwriting, or you write them all and then you pass them out, crumple them up, whatever. That's a little much. I think the Padlet idea might be okay for this. So here's what I want you to do though. However you might want to use this or not in your own classroom, do this for yourself. Go ahead, write down one of your obstacles on a piece of paper. Consider things that have been weighing you down or challenging you this semester. I read a lot of different things in the not the classroom management project. I read a lot of things in your midterm check-in. So go ahead and put one of those things down and then just throw it away. Throw it away as hard as you want. Light it on fire. Do something safe. But go ahead and do this. And then if you haven't started to write down your 10 ideas for community building page, this is kind of a reminder. Start doing that, and this is an idea you could consider using. Okay, so in this before you read section, I'd like you to think about the following questions. And when we say think about these, it's not like, oh, just read over them and then turn the page. Really stop, even jot down your ideas. This move is really important. It's important that we, as teachers, surface prior knowledge our students have, but it's equally as important for students to surface their own prior knowledge. Without doing that, there's no way to compare what you're learning now to what you thought before. So it's a really important move in your classroom when you have things like turn and talks or stop and jots. That's just not for, it's not always just to give students time. That is one reason. It helps give students time and be more confident about something they have to say, but it also forces them to actually think about what they know. So now that I've said all that, go ahead, think about these 3 questions, and then once you're finished, read the interactive learning structures on pages 91 through 117, and then go ahead and continue to review the rest of the PowerPoint. So cooperative learning groups are defined as students working collaboratively in groups of 2 or more to accomplish a specific instructional goal. So there's several reasons you might have to or want to put your students into small groups. So maybe they're completing an assignment cooperatively. So they're assisting each other and bouncing ideas off each other. They might be working on solving a problem. Or if they're in a science classroom or engineering classroom, maybe they're designing an investigation. So maybe the group exists just to share materials. Like, here's this group that will be using this stuff, just to organize that a little better. And there's oftentimes you might ask students to have a small group discussion before sharing with the rest of the class. So it's a safe space to throw their ideas out there. And it's always important that all kids in your class get a chance to say their idea out loud somewhere, because you can't call on every single student in a whole group setting. So when you can have these think, pair, shares or a small group discussion, that's a place where all students will have a chance to share their idea, and that's really, really important. Okay, so take a few minutes, specifically 4 minutes and 33 seconds, unless you're like me who likes to watch videos at a little faster rate. But take that time to see this quick video that summarizes some different types of cooperative learning strategies and examples. Okay, take a moment now and complete this quick write. Here you can just jot down some of the benefits of utilizing group work with students, and then acknowledge some of the considerations, like what do you need to think about? Again, this is a space where you're getting your thinking down on paper, some of the things you just may have thought about which may be beneficial, and what might you need to consider before we actually think about those. Okay, so hopefully you actually did your quick write, so you can now take some time to compare what you wrote down to what we find here. So just for a second, how many did you match up with? Are there any new ideas you hadn't considered on either side, benefits or considerations? So some benefits. Working in small groups actually increases independence in learning. So you might think individual work would do that, but by being able to interact with small groups, you're still bouncing ideas off someone, but you're just less dependent on the teacher. So you end up getting more confidence that you can figure something out as a student, rather than just waiting for the teacher to tell you something and not believing anything can be right until it comes out of the teacher's mouth. And this helps develop social skills. Definitely engagement and problem solving increases because of this confidence you're developing, that you're less dependent on what the right answer from the teacher is, and you actually get some confidence in your own thinking skills. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, a lot greater potential for participation. So if you're bouncing ideas in a small group, or think, pair, share, talk to your elbow or shoulder partner, and you've said your idea out loud, you're way more likely to say it in the whole group because someone else has heard your idea, you've talked about it, and you're like, oh, that isn't a bad idea. I can say that out loud. But if you've never said it out loud before, you might just be nervous, like, oh, I don't want to sound stupid. I mean, this is what students think, right? Like, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm not going to say anything. So by working in small groups first or talking with partners before a whole group discussion, it definitely increases participation by a lot, actually. Um, and as a teacher, you can go around and listen for ideas too. And if a student's not sharing and it's someone that doesn't share very often, and you heard them say something you like, you can specifically call on them and ask them to repeat it. So that increases their confidence as well and helps them maybe participate more in the future. So you're getting feedback in different ways from both teachers and students, and that kind of all feeds into what I was just talking about. And there's mutual construction of meaning making. In science, we call this making sense of ideas or sense making. And when you are building this with your classmates and everyone feels like they're part of the knowledge building, it's really, really important for how students feel about how learn. And I mean, I'm primarily a science educator, so I'm really focused on students feeling like scientists and feeling like they can do science, but this is true of any content. If they can make meaning or construct ideas together and not rely on just the teacher telling them, it does wonders for everything about how students think. So what are some considerations? There's plenty. So you need to have these procedures in place. We've talked about these. Like this kind of ties into like what are your norms and are your procedures in place, etc. Pacing activities. When you do a lot of group work, you can't just fly through your content like you might have thought. And this isn't as big of a deal when we think about like maybe elementary, but high school and middle school teachers are often like, oh, I need to get through this. And this is taking too long. It's much more important for students to know how to learn and be confident in their learning than rather they know, you know, the definition of some word you think that's really important because it showed up in the standards, right? If they know how to learn, they can learn that definition later. But we need to give them that confidence in how to learn and how to think. So again, that is a consideration though. The pace is going to be very different. How are you going to monitor students? So when they're in small groups, it's very easy to get off task. So one of the things that's really important that I know I made a mistake when I started doing a lot of group learning is I was so excited to see students actually talking to each other. I just let them go too long. And that, ties into the pacing issue. But when they get all the time in the world like that, because I was just excited that they were talking, they start to go off topic. They're like, ooh, we're going to get a ton of time to talk. Let's talk about something else first. But if they know you're going to pull them back in a set amount of time, they will get to their point and then come back and report out. So it goes a lot faster. But you do have to stick to that. I still struggle with that a little bit. How are you going to give feedback? So when they're in small groups like this, it's really important that you're going around and you're listening to what people say and you're asking probing questions and getting at what they know as they're having these discussions. If you're just zoning out while they're having discussions and then you bring them back, you don't really know what you're going to get back in that whole group discussion, right? So you need to make sure you're going out and you're helping build these ideas. Same thing if they're doing some kind of project. They might be completely lost. You won't know it unless you're circulating. And then again, daily accountability. Depending on how your norms are set up and what is happening in any given time, you might be in groups really a lot of the time and all the time, or you might be in and out of groups. So depending on how that structure is, you might have different systems for accountability as well. So we alluded to some of this in that last slide, but I just want to take some time on this slide to specifically address some different strategies and routines that support cooperative learning. So the first one, you really need to think about room arrangement. We spent an entire week thinking about how we set up our classroom and how it was really important to think about how our physical learning environment is going to match our instructional goals. So if we know we're going to be doing a lot of group learning, we need to arrange our room in a way to make sure students can easily get into groups. And when they are in that formation, it's easy for us to get around and have discussions with those individual groups. Another important point is to teach the rules and procedures. So again, we had an entire week talking about how important this is. One of the things that happens, especially in secondary, with secondary teachers, and you may have already heard this from maybe some of your colleagues at where you're placed, they'll say, oh, I can't believe kids don't know how to do this, or I can't believe they just don't, just simple things that we do think might be simple. But if you think back to when you were that age, maybe you weren't doing those things either. And maybe you were, but not all students are. All students' brains are at different levels, and they have these different organizational abilities at different points in their lives. So it's just really important, no matter how smart and advanced you think your kids are. Like I taught AP Bio and AP Environmental Science, and a lot of things surprised me. But the more I learned, the more I understood I really can't be frustrated by that. I just need to take it for what it is and make sure I give them grace, and I take the time to teach them and reinforce. All right, that was a tangent. I apologize. Okay, so you also want to be strategic when you are forming groups. So you need to look at a lot of different variables. And depending on the age they are, you might have to weight these different variables differently, and the context too. But think about their abilities, what kind of language backgrounds they have, what kind of personalities of the different students. Are there certain friend groups you may not want to put together just because they might be off task? So there's a lot of different things, and the more you know your students and your classroom, the better you can be at forming groups. And it's important also to switch up groups. Sometimes when you switch up groups, people are really upset because they liked their group, but a lot of times there are people in groups that need to be separated, like they're done with each other and they need to be separated. So when you make new groups, you're never going to make everyone happy. But it doesn't take very long for people to just get used to their new groups, and they don't ever complain again, basically. It's like they're unhappy for a day or even a minute, and then they just realize, oh, I have a new group now. And that helps if you form groups more, if you switch up groups more often than not. Be sure you have signals to get students' attention. So when students are working in small groups, it's going to be a lot louder. And it's not bad noise as long as it's productive noise. But it's way, way louder than if you're just, providing a group lecture to the whole class. So you do need to have a way that's not just you yelling over them to get their attention. And there's lots of different things you can do. Some people just turn the lights off for a second, or they might have some kind of timer or ringer or bell. Okay. So this also, as you're doing this, you want to promote interdependence within the group. So you want them working together, but you also need to hold individuals accountable. So you have to create these opportunities for students to work together so they can learn from each other, support each other, build knowledge from each other's ideas, but also have a way that each individual is accountable in adding their ideas to the group. So it gets a little tricky in practice. So you really need to set up a culture of learning in your classroom where all students are part of the knowledge building. And how you do this is through developing and reinforcing class norms. And again, all of this is connecting back to some of the stuff we've done already, right? So if you have these class norms and you reinforce these class norms that have to do with how they have discussions in class and how you build off each other's ideas, and you make your thinking visible, and you argue from evidence, and you're respectful and equitable so everyone gets a chance to talk. So all of those things should be on your norms, your classroom norms, really, to get to a classroom that will be able to have these small group learning environments in a very accountable way, yet still be dependent on each other to build that knowledge. Okay, so that was a lot for one slide. I apologize, I kind of rambled a little bit, but go ahead now and reflect on the different kinds of strategies and routines that support this learning. Think about different kinds of signals you might use to get students' attention. Maybe your mentor teacher uses one. Maybe you've seen one used before that you want to try. But these are all things you just want to kind of reflect on and think about for when you have your classroom. Okay, so let's take a moment to pause and reflect here. For you, what's the greatest benefit of cooperative learning? And what is your greatest anticipated challenge? All right, so after you've done that, please review the Setting Up and Managing Group Work document. You can find that on Blackboard. So this slide has an image of the Teaching Works document on setting up and managing small group work. This handout's also provided as a PDF and it's linked on the Blackboard site. And it's meant to be used as a guide to help you plan for and enact small group work. So when you look at this, you're going to notice that there's really a lot of invisible work that you need to do in order for successful group work to happen. I mentioned some of that on slide 10, but here, take a few moments to review the document and then consider how you're going to prepare for, launch, monitor, and then also how are you going to wrap up small group and whole group work. So this slide, you can see we have 2 videos that are linked, and they're going to help us connect to different kinds of cooperative learning models, as well as thinking about the importance of preparing students before they engage in collaborative work. And finally, an example of how one teacher uses literature circles, which is what we did, right? But she uses them with her multilingual students in a secondary classroom. Do note that you likely have to sign up to view that final video, but the site's free and they do have really great information for you. But they just want to keep track of who is accessing this information, and you might get some emails, but you can always unsubscribe. It's not a bad thing to subscribe to, though. Teaching Channel used to have free resources. It's not free anymore, sadly, but it is free to still sign up and get links to some really great and informative short clips and articles.